Are we live? Are we on? Are we doing it? Welcome back to another episode of Build Biology. I got my favorite Dangerous Dan here, and myself. I'm Nads, and I got something really super crazy for you. I think it was before you were born. When were you born?
I was in '85.
You were still like
Right at the cusp.
Yeah. This is the IMSA GTO 300zx, the Z32, built by Clayton Cunningham. This thing won Sebring, it won Daytona, it won Le Mans, designed by a guy named Trevor Harris, driven by a dude named John Morton. I was actually at a race in Del Mar where this car ran.
I think you should do this one.
Really? Can I be trusted?
He's already fanboying out. Like,
this is amazing.
Before my time.
And we get to leave the Donut Garage and go to the Motoring Club in Marina Del Rey, thanks to Ron.
Hold on. Not like I don't want to go.
You're going to be there. You got to tag along on this one. Whoa, okay. Kind of losing it right now. Standing next to this and standing next to you here at the Motoring Club in Marina Del Rey, and we're getting into possibly one of the greatest cars of the GTO campaigns of the early 90s, and with the man who had a lot to do with it, Trevor Harris. Let's talk about you for a hot second, because I can't gloss over that. You're so mild-mannered about your contribution to this car and the Nissan program as a whole. But even before this car, before the GTP car, you were involved with a certain gentleman named Peter Brock, and you worked with him on the infamous Giant Slayer 510s with a certain driver named John Morton, and you guys just wrecked shop on the Alphas and the BMWs, and it was sort of a changing of a tide. You essentially helped introduce Nissan Motorsports to North America, is that correct?
Right. As far as competitive vehicles went and race vehicles from Japan went, the 510 Datsun kind of, it really dominated motor racing for a couple of years there. Let me get back into when I went to work for Pete Brock. At the end of 1970, I gave Pete a call to see if he had anything going that might be useful for me, and he said, you know, I've got a potential program coming up to race the Datsun 510 street car in a new series called the 2.5 Challenge series. So it was a series for small production American cars like the BMW 2002, the Alpha GTAs, the Alphas, which were really much more race cars than a little 510 Datsun sedan. So he said he had this series coming up, and could I come to work for him and do the chassis development work for him, which is kind of what I do generally. Fortunately, he respected me enough to get me to come up and do the dirty work on the 510 Datsun and the 240Zs, which we were racing in 1971.
What are we looking at here?
Well, we're looking at basically a 1989 300zx Nissan on steroids. And basically I got the job to design a new chassis for the 300zx. I was Nissan's chief designer at that time, and I'd done the GTP cars that we were racing at the time. This car came up as a big project because Nissan wanted to have a truly updated 300zx race car in the United States. So I got the job to design it. So while we were racing the GTP car in '88, late '88, I was designing this tube frame car to run what was called the GTO class at that time, and the car basically had the same motor, about 800 horsepower motor that we had in the GTP car. So we had a lot of power, short wheelbase.
90-inch wheelbase, if you think about that, that's very short even by today's standards. I'd like to talk about the exterior and then work our way into, maybe we could take some of the panels off and look at some of the suspension. Is that okay with you, Trevor?
Let's do it.
So the exterior on this car, so this definitely has the 96-inch wheelbase. This is chassis number 2, correct?
This is chassis number 2.
Chassis number
correct.
2. And there was a 76 car and a 75 car, correct?
Yeah.
You guys had a
yes,
two-car program. Now, remember,
correct.
now I've also heard that the only thing, if we could go see the back, the only stock item on this car, and then maybe it might be this wing too, because I remember this from the Z32s, but is the taillight garnish. Everything else, while it does look like the silhouette, this is all, is it carbon fiber or fiberglass?
Yeah, carbon fiber bodywork. And the body had to basically be based on the production car. So this looks, you know, very much like the original car with certain details. The tires are so wide that you've got to change the fender well shape.
Of course.
And flatten it out and
yes.
widen it. Same thing in the front. So it looks like a production 300ZX, and then we were allowed to have a wing on the car.
Single element
wing.
back then, and you have a gurney flap here too. The end plates here, you could adjust this as well too. So
right,
you get
and
a little.
You could adjust the wing. I mean, they had the ability to do some wing angle adjustment, although this one does not have an adjustable wing on it. Yet, I know development of the car took place over a period of 6 years. This basic car was raced for 6 years.
Constant work in progress.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing how well it did too, because also want to point out that its speed on the straights was faster than some of the GTP cars,
yeah,
the Group C cars.
204 miles an hour, I believe, at Le Mans. That's what I read. I wasn't there. But in '94, they call it a hat trick. It won Sebring. It won its class at Le Mans. It was 5th overall at Le Mans in '94, speaking of that, and they had to fix a broken camshaft during the race. So how do you do that? No, it was quite amazing. And the fact that these cars became really bulletproof cars. Over the years, in '92, Steve Millen won Sebring, 12 hours of Sebring with the car. In '94, it won the 12 hours of Sebring. And in '95, I think they won 3 years with these cars at Sebring.
Unbelievable.
Good
12
track.
hours too.
Yeah, 12-hour races.
Do you think we could pull off some of the panels and take a look underneath, Trevor?
It's up to
Okay, it's up to Lance and the guys.
It's up to the crew.
We're going to see if we could take those off, and let's see what we could do. Whoa, since I don't know what I'm doing, special thanks to Ron and Lance for actually removing everything on this, because I'd like to fondle it, but I don't want to really touch it and do work on it and everything, because I'll just make it worse. We got the body work off of it, and this is Trevor's specialty right here. I'm going to come over here, and we're going to get into, oh my God, so much. Like, we were talking about the chassis a little bit, but looking at this right here, this is twin turbo, V6, 4-cam, 800 horsepower, same engine that's in the GTP car, same basic architecture as the engine that was in the Z32. Trevor was telling me off camera that it's factory heads too, and an aluminum block built by Electromotive. And you know, we were also talking about, like, it's amazing to see the Nissan valve covers here that you recognize with the addition of the NPTI logo on it as well. So the engine is pretty amazing. These are restrictors here. That's probably from IMSA, that restrict the intake, that what you're going to get for the turbos. So they essentially choke the turbos down. So Trevor, just off the top of your head, what do you think, if this engine was unrestricted, how much were these restrictors choking you guys, if you guys were still able to get 800 horsepower from the twin turbo?
Well, I know that in 1986, with the smaller engine than this, it wasn't a 4-cam engine, for qualifying,
The qualifying trim. Where you turn it
Qualifying
up.
trim with no restrictors. The engine's made over 1,100 horsepower. So what this could make unrestricted, I wouldn't want to go there.
But it's probably much higher than the 1100
It's
because
probably
it's
higher than 1,100.
Wow.
If you were allowed any amount of boost and a short life period for the engine, you could probably make a surprising number of horsepower.
Which also, quick point, when you talk about qualifying trim, you turn up the horsepower a little bit more, and then you're also sacrificing reliability for that one fast lap to get you into a better starting grid position. But then when you go a race, especially the types of racing that this vehicle did, 12 hours, 24 hours, you want reliability more than just pure outright performance.
Right, and we'd reduce the boost for 12-hour races and 24-hour races with these engines, but they were extremely reliable.
I like the V-mount radiator intercooler setup, but what we really want to talk to, because we have the man, I don't know if we've ever been, we've seen people who build their own cars. This is a man who literally built this car, like from scratch. So when we talk about this, Ron was talking off camera about how thick this sway bar is. It's funny, Trevor's recalling now from what he built more than 30 years ago and saying, I remember doing all this. I remember changing all the diameters of the tubing.
I didn't build it, I designed it.
Designed it, designer, the engineer.
I remember drawing this part, and it is the way it was originally drawn. I mean, it's interesting looking at this late date, but these parts didn't change over the years. 6 years, same parts.
I want to get into a little bit about, we have adjustable sway bars back here, and we also have the spring and shock package. So now the thickness of the sway bars, Ron was commenting off camera, that allows you to run a little bit of a softer spring. Is that how you prefer to set the cars up?
Right, the way I set these cars up and the way I typically do most cars, I tend to run rather large sway bars on them and then make the springs as soft as I can get away with.
And what does that give you in terms of the chassis?
It gives me low roll with the sway bars, keep the car from rolling and keep the tire angle on the ground relatively constant. That is to say, the tire isn't, I mean, you don't want the chassis to roll a lot in the corner, because the way the geometry of the wheel geometry works is typically the tire leans at an angle that's pretty close to what the chassis is leaning at.
So then you're not using your entire contact patch, you're leaning on the shoulder of the tire
Right,
instead.
you want to keep as much of the rubber on the ground as possible.
And the thicker sway bar gives you less roll. What does the softer spring give you now?
Well, it gives you more compliance with the ground.
So
And
it keeps the tire on the ground in terms of bump.
hopefully. Yeah.
Is what you're striving
and
for.
when we say soft, I mean the springs, it's not like this car was like a street car.
Of course.
At all. So the term soft is relative, and stiff sway bar, that's relative. But generally, this car and the GTP car, which we can't see again over there, it prioritizes roll stiffness. It gets a lot of its roll stiffness from the sway bars, typically, and same with this car. And then you work with the springs on a given course to make the car properly compliant.
But I think it's neat that you're able to run the way you run your sway bars that allows you to run a softer spring, because usually like the stopgap Band-Aid that a lot of motorsports teams chase is just throwing extra spring rate at a car to try to fix what would potentially be wrong, and then you lose a lot of your compliance.
That's probably not the right way to do it.
Exactly.
If you're looking for an ideal situation. So yeah, and whoever's doing the setup of the car, it's up to that guy to play games with the springs and sway bars and come up with an overall package that the driver, A, the driver can work with, and B, the stopwatch looks good with.
Can we look in the office? No.
Sure.
I don't even really want to mess with this or even try to get into this, what I'm seeing is it's a single seat configuration. And there wasn't, like, if you look at today's race cars, there's not a lot of gauges or elements that the drivers could control back then, huh?
Well, we've got a few gauges forward of him there on the dash. So he's got enough to take care of what he has to take care of. So you got to keep track of oil pressures. It's nice to keep track of basic engine functions, but no more gauges than necessary.
What sort of telemetry were you guys working with back then in, like, say, 1992?
Well, in 92, we were able to, keep track of general characteristics, G loads, roll figures. There were a lot of dynamic chassis factors we could keep track of, but not like today. Some of today's race cars, you can monitor the tire temperature across the tire. We didn't have any of that sort of stuff. That came up with Indy cars later in the 90s. But with our cars, we weren't really terribly sophisticated with the telemetry that the cars ran. We didn't have a lot of information about.
And there wasn't any real-time telemetry back then either, so you're not really getting anything over the pit while you're having to record it.
No,
and then
we weren't dynamically
Yes.
in a race looking at all the chassis functions as they can now.
So you're basically,
I wouldn't even want it to, I don't think.
You're basically building your setup and then hoping that works throughout the race.
Well, and you can do changes.
I was going to say, as you see the tire
changes.
wear and as you see the fuel efficiency and as you see from driver feedback, you can make changes with each pit stop that I'm sure you guys were doing
right,
as well.
and the driver has what's called an adjustable sway bar. I mean, the driver...
Oh, so it was cockpit adjustable on that?
Yeah, it was cockpit adjustable in the rear only, but you can change the roll stiffness of the car and the basic handling of the car by changing the effective stiffness of the sway bar on one end of the car, which changes the front to back ratio, which basically changes the handling of the car. So the driver has that available to him in this car, but not a lot of other things that he can do.
And even with that one he's changing based on as the tires are wearing, going through, as the fuel load's changing,
right.
As the brakes are heating up, he could actually affect some small changes, but that's about it.
That's it. That's it. And then complain a lot.
I'm completely blown away. I mean, I'm sure we've learned more than you've forgotten over the years. And I think it was so awesome for you to just take the time to just walk through this. And I hope you had as good of a time as I did, because this was an amazing journey for me. I used to watch, that's how old I am. I used to watch this car run in Del Mar and Long Beach. And I grew up in Southern California and big fan of Electromotive and MPTI and Trevor and everything. Cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come out and school us a little bit about the inside of what a 1990s top level race car that won Daytona, Le Mans, Sebring. I mean, the list goes on and on. Championships, drivers, everything. Amazing story, amazing man.
Well, it's fun for me to look at these. This is a time machine for me.
It's
and
amazing.
It's a fun time machine.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't do that because I wouldn't have done it justice. And you just know so much history, and then between you and Trevor, there's just so much knowledge that I would have just left out. I can geek out about the car, but
I don't even know if it was amazing watching him like forget all the cool stuff he'd done on that car. He's like, oh yeah, that's right, we did do it like this, and I thought that was super awesome and everything.
He's forgot more than I know about cars. That's
I don't know. I need to sell a kidney. My liver's not in good shape, but I need to sell a kidney. If I could sell a kidney, maybe I could scrape enough together, and then I could at least get into the reserve. But you can get this thing from Stratus Auctions. I could be driving around Willow Springs on an open track day.
I couldn't be responsible for that car. There's no way.
Check, check, check. 1, 2.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
I didn't want to slate too hard. No.
Is this thing turned on? It is. Oh, okay.
I thought you were talking about me. So.